Hey everybody, it's Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. On last week's Friday episode, I spoke with 7 women who were running for office for the first time. I had so much fun recording the episode that I've decided to do that kind of episode again. On today's episode, you'll hear from 3 women who are running for the U.S. Congress. Liz Watson is running in the Indiana 9th District, Tiffany Bond is running in the Maine 2nd District, and Allison Galbraith is running in the Maryland 1st District. All 3 are running for the first time. All 3 are exceedingly qualified for the office they want to hold. And all 3 are running against Republican men who are unresponsive to their districts. All 3 of these women are also mothers of young children and are making a sacrifice to run for office. I hope you'll listen all the way through. I think you'll be as inspired by them as I was. And I can't wait to call each of them Congresswoman in November.
Hey everybody, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and I am here today with Liz Watson, who is running for Congress in the Indiana 9th District. Hello, Liz.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. My first question for you is just to tell us a little bit about your background, who you are, and why you've decided to run for Congress now.
Okay. I'm a 5th-generation Hoosier. I'm from Bloomington, Indiana. I have 2 kids, a boy and a girl. They're 7 and 11. They actually go to the elementary school I went to growing up. I'm a big advocate for public education. And I am a women's rights and workers' rights attorney. And so, the work that I did was trying to make our economy work for our families. I had been very focused on thinking about things like paid family and medical leave, about affordable child care, about making sure that we have a living wage instead of a minimum wage that leaves people working in poverty. I worked at a place called the National Women's Law Center, where I ran a program focused on women in low-wage jobs, and I worked in Congress where I was the labor policy director for the Democrats on the Labor Committee, and I got to write a lot of federal legislation that would honestly make a huge difference for working women and for families, and that was really important to me to try to do that because I feel like we have an economy right now that doesn't work for real people and that only works for the 1% and giant corporations, and I'm sick and tired of it. But what I saw in Congress, after Trey Hollingsworth, the first-term Republican incumbent from Tennessee who bought the seat in my district last cycle in Indiana, what I saw in Congress out of Hollingsworth and what I saw from President Trump, is that they're very clearly doing everything they can to make life worse for us instead of better. So instead of trying to create opportunity in our lives, which is, what I think we ought to be doing, what I think a Congress ought to be doing, they're about taking away health insurance, taking away protections for women's health, taking away safety protections that keep people from dying on the job, taking away clean air and clean water protections that keep my kids and everyone's kids safe. And I was just disgusted, to be honest. And so, I am one of the women who marched. I was very, very, very upset with the outcome of this election and wanted to do everything I could. And I was standing in Congress trying to do everything I could to stop all of the sort of attacks on our families that happened after President Trump came in and after the Republican Congress had a rubber stamp for all of their worst ideas. And I couldn't stop it. And I felt powerless in that the reality was that even though I was doing every single thing I could, to try to protect families in Southern Indiana and across the nation, it was very clear to me that we were outnumbered. And the truth is, in Congress, it comes down to having the votes. And I want to be a vote on the House floor. I have sat behind the guys long enough, writing their legislation, writing their talking points. I'm ready to be a vote and a voice for us.
That's great. So tell me a little bit about the area of Indiana that you're representing. I think people think of Indiana as sort of a deep red state. So what does your district look like?
So my district has historically been Democratic. We have 13 counties in the district. We have been gerrymandered some, but I worked for Frank McCloskey, who was the congressman from my district. When I was 18 years old, I was his intern. That was my first public service job. And then we had Lee Hamilton for many, many years and Barron Hill. So those are all three Democrats, Lee Hamilton for more than 3 decades. We've had some gerrymandering. We had Todd Young went to the Senate, and that opened up this seat last cycle. And so Todd Young was a Republican in the seat, and he went to the Senate. It opened up the seat. And then this, $50 million net worth, 50 million plus net worth Republican moved in from Tennessee and just decided to buy himself a seat in Congress. And we had a very strong Democrat who was running, and she was running really close within the margin of error, actually, to Trey Hollingsworth through the fall. But then after everything happened with Comey and the emails and all of that, the lead just opened up right at the end. And as you know, the down ticket effect of Trump was really harsh on Democrats down ballot.
What communities are within this district? You mentioned Bloomington.
So we have 13 counties. We go all the way from just outside Indianapolis, Greenwood and Franklin, all the way down to the Kentucky border. So that includes Jeffersonville and New Albany. And then we've got a lot of little towns in between: Salem, Paoli, Martinsville, Nashville, Bedford. It's a really wonderfully beautiful district. There's a lot of tourism here. A lot of people like I did when I was a kid, go to Nashville to see the fall leaves. There's a lot of hunting and fishing and camping. It's a gorgeous place to live.
That's great. It's a place I've driven through. I live in Chicago, and my brother lives down in Cincinnati, so I've driven through the area, right. But I don't know it as well.
Everybody assumes that Indiana is flat, but actually southern Indiana is very hilly, and I know that because I'm a runner. I've run up a lot of those hills, and they're no joke. We have Indiana University, of course, but then we have, we still have a fair amount of manufacturing in our district. We've got a strong healthcare sector, hospitality, restaurants, retail, that kind of thing.
So let's talk about a few issues. I think the one that's on everyone's mind right now is guns. So can you talk a little bit about where you stand on various issues, maybe including gun control?
Sure, absolutely. So, the first thing is I want to say that I'm so proud of the students who walked out and who spoke their mind on the issue of common sense gun reform, and I'm so thankful to them. And frankly, adults, we need to follow their lead. We need to start adulting. And I'm sick and tired of, getting nowhere on this issue. And it's an outrage that every time, we have a mass shooting, whether it's a school shooting or somewhere else, we have a few days where people talk about the need for common sense gun reform, and then everybody goes back, and buries their heads in the sand. We cannot do this again. So, I'm absolutely committed. We're in the midst actually right now of doing a petition to my current congressman who's backed by the NRA, asking him to support common sense gun reform. I put 2 kids on the bus every day, and what I think about is I want to know that 2 kids are going to come home safe. And that's like every mother across America, right? And we all share that in common. And if we can't take steps to protect our children, shame on us. So that is why I support common sense gun reform. There's more that we agree on than people think. So, universal background checks has broad agreement. We obviously need to be studying the problem. The CDC needs to be able to study the problem, because if you don't understand a problem, you can't solve it. We need to make sure that we are addressing the problem of high-capacity magazines, and, you just don't need an assault rifle to go hunting. We know that when people who are convicted of domestic violence have guns, that they're shooting their victims all too often. And so somebody who's convicted of violence against their spouse or partner, putting a gun in that person's hands probably doesn't make sense. I mean, there's some really obvious things we can do and that we need to do to protect our kids, to protect our families, and frankly, to protect people we've never met, right? But this is really important. It's a top priority, and I am absolutely committed to standing up for our families.
And what are some other, you've mentioned a couple of other issues, but what are the other issues that you're really concerned with right now?
Well, here in southern Indiana, there are a lot of people who are just struggling, living paycheck to paycheck. A lot of them are working moms, a lot of people who can't afford to fill their prescriptions. One of the first stories I heard when I was out, when it had just started on the campaign trail, I talked to a woman who had lost her niece, who was working 2 jobs that were both about minimum wage. They were both fast food jobs because in today's economy, a lot of times one job isn't enough. If you're a low-wage worker, you end up having two because you can't get full-time hours at either job.
Mhm.
And so she was working two jobs, and she had 3 kids. And despite how hard she was working, she could not get by. And she wound up turning to drugs for distraction. And we have a terrible, terrible opioid crisis in our district. And she died of an overdose. So now there are these kids who are in the foster care system and, don't have a parent. She was a single mom. So, the struggle that people are facing around financial insecurity, around not being able to take care of their children, that's real. We know that, wages for working people have been stuck for most of my lifetime. They've basically been flat. And it doesn't have to be that way. We're more productive than ever before. In my lifetime, our productivity has gone up by 75%. But the wages aren't coming back to us. They're going to the CEOs. They're getting stashed in offshore bank accounts. And I would like to see them being used to put food on the table for working families. That I think is really the fundamental struggle that people are facing in Southern Indiana. The thing that is really the hallmark of being a Hoosier is that we are just so darn hardworking. So you have so many hardworking people, so many hardworking families, and yet, so many people who are living paycheck to paycheck, can't save for retirement, can't afford child care for their kids, anything that approximates decent child care. I had a conversation with a mom down in New Albany who told me about how she's actually a child care provider, and she had been going to school to get a certificate in early childhood education. And her hourly pay was $10 an hour. And so she said, I have 3 kids and I can't afford childcare for my own kids. I'm not even going to get a raise because I, have this certificate. I'm doing it because this is a calling and I know how important the early years are, and I want to be the very best childcare provider I can be. I take this so seriously. But, what I'm getting paid, I can't afford to live, and I can't afford to take care of my children the way I feel is right. And, she's doing some of the most important work there is, and we're not doing anything to value her work. So, when you think about what Congress's role in all of this is, Congress has a very big role to play. Right now, it's turning its back. It's turning its back on regular people in Indiana and across the country. And what that means is it's not lifting a finger to raise the minimum wage. I got to lead the development of the $15 minimum wage bill when I worked in Congress. It's not doing anything about that. That's the bill that Senator Sanders sponsored in the Senate. My boss was the lead sponsor in the House. It's not doing anything, to make it so that childcare is affordable. There's a bill in Congress that would make sure that you don't pay more than 7% of your income for childcare. Well, that's a good idea. We ought to do that, the Childcare for Working Families Act. But the Republicans that we have in Congress now, Trey Hollingsworth, they're not bringing those bills up for hearings or votes. These are the sort of things we should be doing. When I worked in Congress, I actually wrote a working families agenda for the United States Congress around raising people's pay, making sure that we have things like child care and paid family leave that are no-brainers that other countries are doing as a matter of course, ending workplace discrimination. This is the kind of thing that would make a difference for us. It's the kind of thing that Congress is just ignoring.
Yeah, I agree. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about is about your kids and how you're balancing running for office with having children, what your kids think about you running for Congress. My kids are always telling me to run for office, so I'm curious what other people's kids think.
Yeah, the truth is it's a lot to run for Congress, right? You're out all the time, and I do think that my kids, like a lot of kids, who are paying attention, were very upset by the results of the election. They understand that what mommy's trying to do is get the country back on track, and they know that's important. On a day-to-day basis, it can be hard. My husband is amazing, and I couldn't do it without him. So he's the one who is really picking up a lot of the things that I used to do. And so I think in some ways, that's been a nice thing for our kids to have all that time with their dad. But of course, it's a sacrifice. And you can't sugarcoat that. It's just real.
Mm-hmm. But it's going to be so important for there to be moms and moms of young children in Congress. And so I know how difficult it must be, but I really commend you for doing that and for saying this is important.
Thank you. Yeah, when you think about, some of these things that I just talked about, they're just not. There's a big boys table in Congress, where some of the issues get to go.